Sunday morning on BBC Radio Scotland.
Hello and welcome to Sunday Morning with me, Zara Janjua. Today I'll be catching up with the international best-selling writer Kate Moss as she delves into her vast catalogue of books and shares the way that religion and fate are interwoven through many of her stories. And have you been one of the millions of people hooked in by Netflix series Nobody Wants This? I know I have. It stars Adam Brody and Kristen Bell and is inspired by the writer's conversion to Judaism. Well, I'll be catching up with Vanessa Almila about her experience converting for love. And Scotland this morning is waking up to the very sad news that former First Minister Alex Salmond has died, aged 69. There will be a full analysis of that on the Sunday show from 10, but just after 9, our panel will be reflecting on what the loss of a major figure means for us. We'll also be delving into some of the other major stories of this week, including the US election and Melania Trump's pro-choice stance on abortion, plus Black History Month and an art exhibition, which nearly lost one of its artworks after a cleaner thought it was destined for the rubbish bin. Oh dear. So music first, and after this, consider it a fixation, especially over the years when it's come to the role of women in the church, same-sex relationships and contraception, all of which and more is explored in a new book, Lower Than the Angels, A History of Sex and Christianity by the eminent historian, writer and broadcaster Professor Dermot McCulloch, who joins me now. A very, very warm welcome to you this morning, Dermot.
Thank you very much. Good
Hello.
morning.
Lovely to have you with us. First of all, congratulations on your book. And thank you for coming to speak to us about it. It's been fascinating to read through. And I mean, it's such a huge, vast subject. You explore the Christian theology of sex, but can you explain briefly what you mean by this? How has it evolved over the centuries? Because a lot of people think of it as, don't they?
They do. And the Christian theology of sex, that phrase you used, what you'll find in this book is that there is no single Christian theology of sex. There are loads of different ones, and they're actually contradictory very often. I think people would be quite surprised by a lot of the findings in this book. It's a long, complicated story. It can be depressing, but sometimes it's frankly quite funny. But it's the reverses which fascinate me. The fact that At the present day, most Christian churches regard the family as what they're about, a Christian family at the center of things. But that's not so historically. For more than 1,000 years, the church thought of marriage as a second best. And the big show in town was celibacy, virginity. And that expressed in the monastic life and in the Western Church, the Catholic Church, the fact that all clergy were made celibate from the 12th century. The shape of this story isn't at all apparent if you look at the church at the present day. You've really got to delve back. That's why it's worth doing.
So that sort of obsession with purity and abstinence, did that then inform the standards that were set after, or that came after? Does that sort of set the standard today?
Yes, it's a strand which came out of Judaism from the Jewish prophets.
Oh, interesting.
It was fed into Christianity. So in the 2nd century of the Christian era, the Common Era, you get monastic communities for the first time, monasteries, nuns, monks, and actually look at the Bible. And you can't really find that life at all. So this is something which has actually been imported into the Christian story, and very successfully indeed. You could hardly think of the Christian world without monks and nuns. But it's an import, and this idea of purity then became central. And so clergy, for instance, who were all married with families in the early church, by the 11th and 12th century, the Western Church, the Catholic Church, was saying no clergy should be married because marriage and sex are linked and they're impure, and what a priest has to do is celebrate the Mass, in other words, consecrate bread and wine and turn them into the body and blood of Christ. That demands purity. So no sex at all. And at the same time, to emphasize the church's control of sex, the laity, the ones left who can marry, are brought into church. And so I think one of the most surprising things for most people in the book will be the fact that for more than half the church's existence, up to the 12th century, in the West, no one got married in church. You just wouldn't think of it. And when you think of all the present rows in the church today, the Church of Scotland, the Episcopal Church of Scotland are going towards same-sex marriage, a huge split, huge arguments. Well, the fact was, no one went to church to get married.
It's interesting
for at least 500 years.
Sex is such a taboo subject in Christianity still today. I'm interested to know, Dermot, I just... From reading your own background and knowing, of course, about you so well, I wonder if you can reflect a little bit on your own story and how that has informed this book, ultimately, why you chose to write it.
Of course, it's influenced it. We're all interested in sex one way or another, but my personal history is that of a clergyman's son. My father was a priest of the Scottish Episcopal Church, went down to become a priest in Church of England. That's where I grew up. And I went forward for ordination. I was ordained deacon in the Church of England, but I was also an openly gay man with a partner. And in my naivety, I thought this would be okay with the church, a bit challenging, but no, the church couldn't cope.
And this was the 80s, was it?
This is in the late 1980s, yes. And so the bishop of the diocese in which I was in effectively took fright over this and said, well, I can't ordain you priest having ordained you deacon. So that is personal history, and the reader ought to know that. We've all got our personal histories that we bring to the study of history. No history is unbiased, and it's very good for the reader to know what the likely biases of the author are.
Tell me about some of the research that you uncovered. You said that there was some very depressing history in there, but also some very funny history. What were some of the major points that you discovered, or things that you learned that you hadn't considered before?
Well, let's start with a really depressing one, though. It's so bizarre. I'm not sure it is depressing. It's the story of sodomites, same-sex people in the Western Church in the 12th century. Someone possibly a friar, invented the story about the first Christmas Eve. And it was the little baby Jesus wouldn't come into the world until all the sodomites had died.
Oh.
So God the Father duly killed all the sodomites in the world, and little baby Jesus could go down into the manger in Bethlehem. Now, isn't that bizarre? But I think there's an explanation for this story, which was very frequently preached about on Christmas Day in the Middle Ages. The explanation is that Jesus in the New Testament says absolutely nothing about homosexuality, and that's always worried people who hate sodomy, and those who still are opposed to that sort of thing. Well, this story explains it. You see, Jesus didn't talk about homosexuality because there were no sodomites in the world.
Yeah.
So it's a horrid story, but it also has an explanation, and historians look for explanations. That there's something which is both horrible and funny. But I also like the story of an Irish monk. I might tell you about this.
Tell us.
Scotine of Tiscoffin. We can't really date him, but he's sometime between the 7th and 9th centuries. Well, he was in the habit of sleeping in his monastic cell with 2 maidens with pointed breasts, and this was to prove his chastity. But another saint, Saint Brendan, got a bit suspicious about this and made remarks about it. And the maidens with pointed breasts were extremely angry. So they rushed into the cell of St. Brendan with burning coals in their robes, which is an allusion to a passage in the Bible. And they threw the burning coals off the robes, which were completely unsinged, and jumped into bed with him. And about an hour later, they said to St. Brendan, right, just get up and have a cold bath because you're keeping us all awake with your evident longing for us. Isn't that a ridiculous story?
I mean,
but what it is...
My mother was obsessed with stories from the Bible, and actually I really enjoyed hearing a lot of her reflections over the years as well. And I think all religions have some wonderful stories in them. I do think you've done some incredible research in there. As you're talking, though, I'm wondering how much you were conflicted between yourself and your faith, because, you know, there was lots of stories there to reinforce perhaps a sense of not belonging.
Yeah, I think for a lot of gay teenagers, it's a real problem, and it was for me. But I sorted it out quite quickly, and I think being a historian made me sort it out to see that there really wasn't a problem. There wasn't anything to talk about except to explore with a historian's curiosity why we got there and where we might go next as well. And I do sympathize with those who feel very worried about the progress of sex and the way things are panning out in marriage and so on, because it's all happened so quickly. Really, in my lifetime, 72 years, things have extraordinarily moved on. And it is not surprising that some people find this very worrying, very frightening. And I hope this book will stop people being frightened by all the change.
Well, you've certainly done the work, and I think that when you're looking for answers to do this breadth of research, actually one of the things I wanted to touch on with you is the changing role of women in the church, because of course that is something that's changed a huge deal over, well, as you say, the 72 years that you've been around. That it's a big talking point, isn't it?
It is, and I think a lot of the anger which we're seeing in churches beyond Christianity, in all sorts of world religions, is because women have taken a place in the world which they've not been allowed to have before. And men and the church told them there were some things they couldn't do. Well, apparently, it turned out in the last 200 years, they could do them. They could be doctors, they could be lawyers, they could be clergy. And that is very threatening for some men. I think a lot of the anger is about male egos being threatened by social change and the changing position of women.
Professor Dermot McCulloch, it's honestly been so lovely to have you with us this morning. Thank you so much for talking us through so much of your book, Lower Than the Angels, which is published by Alan Lane, an imprint of Penguin Books, and it is available now. The Sunday Show with Guy Robertson and Laura McIver is at 10. They'll, of course, be reflecting on the death of former First Minister Alex Salmond, as well as other big stories of the week. There is lots more to come on Sunday morning with me, Zara Janjua, including the story of someone who converted to Judaism for love. Right now, though, it's Harry Styles.
Walking in the garden one day when a snake slipped around her feet. Follow me right over to this tree and I'll give you something good to eat. Why no, are you sure? I don't think it is right. It doesn't matter, just open your mouth and take a tasty bite. Said to him, I think it's a sin, but boy does it look right. Said to her, just take my word and I promise I'd see the light. Why don't you get it in? Cause I don't wanna see your face around here no more. Why don't you skiddly-doo? Cause this is now and that will be more. Cause you all the devil and the devil is bad. Hey! You all the devil and the devil is bad. Hey! You all the devil and the devil is bad. Hey! You all the devil and you are bad. Tempter met him in the desert one day. Are you a son of God? Turn stones into wholesome bread and make your hunger stop. Even though his hunger had grown real strong, he turned and simply replied, man does not live on bread alone, but on the word of God. Turn men and worship me, and the kings of the world are yours. Away from me with the evil ways, cause I worship and serve the living God. Why don't you get it in? Cause I don't wanna see your face around here no more. Why don't you skiddly-doo? Cause this is now and that will be more. Cause you all the devil and the devil is bad. Hey! You all the devil and the devil is bad. Hey! You all the devil and the devil is bad. Hey! You all the devil and you are bad. Was walking in the garden one day when a snake slid around her feet. Follow me right over to this tree and I'll give you something good to eat. Why no, are you sure? I don't think it is right. It doesn't matter, just open your mouth and take a tasty bite. Said to him, I think it's a sin, but boy does it look right. Said to her, just take my word and I promise I'd see the light. Why don't you skiddly-doo? Cause I don't wanna see your face around here no more. Why don't you skiddly-doo? Cause this is now and that will be more. Cause you all the devil and the devil is bad. You all the devil and the devil is bad. You all the devil and the devil is bad. You all the devil and you are bad. Was walking in the garden one day when a snake slipped around her feet. Follow me right over to this tree and I'll give you something good to eat. Why no, are you sure? I don't think it is right. It doesn't matter, just open your mouth and take a tasty bite. Said to him, I think it's a sin, but boy does it look right. Said to her, just take my word and I promise I'd see the light. Why don't you skid it in? Cause I don't wanna see your face around here no more. Why don't you skiddly-doo? Cause this is now and You are the devil and the devil is bad. You are the devil and the devil is bad. You are the devil and the devil is bad. You are the devil and you are bad.
You all right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Don't like it to say. So after I shampooed it, it goes a bit dull.
Oh, it's it?
Yeah.
Oh, it looks lovely, Pip.
Thanks, Tom. You're fishing.
Absolutely fine. 3 points. Yeah.
Thank you.
So here we go again. Monday morning. Oh, joy. Monday. Love Monday.
They're the best.
Everyone's
day,
favourite day of the week.
Yeah, when it's dark and chilly. That's what we like, isn't it?
Do you prefer Monday or Tuesday, though? Because you don't like a Tuesday, do you?
Friday I like.
Yeah. Thursday's all right.
Saturday and Sundays are great.
Yeah.
They're
No,
good.
but I like Sundays.
I like Sunday until about 7 o'clock in the evening.
Oh, I hated last
Then
night.
I get me
hated
homework.
last
I
night.
haven't done my homework feeling.
Oh, I actually said out loud, I hate Sunday nights.
Well,
Hate it.
Right.
Hate it. The difference between 7 o'clock on a Friday night and 7 o'clock on a Sunday night is huge.
Worlds apart.
Yeah.
Although I had a nice evening.
Yeah.
We went to the cinema yesterday.
Did you?
Did you see
We went to see...
Joker?
Yes.
Ah.
Yes.
Did you?
Yes, we did.
You're listening to Sunday Morning with me, Zara Janjua, and it is 8:24 a.m. Now, have you been one of the millions of folk who've been hooked in by a new rom-com offering on Netflix, Nobody Wants This? It introduces us to Joanne, an agnostic podcaster played by Kristen Bell, and Noah, a newly single rabbi played by Adam Brody. Now, after meeting at dinner party, the pair find it difficult to resist one another, but Joanne's non-Jewishness is an obstacle that they hadn't quite anticipated, especially as Noah's family and community start to learn about the relationship.
Cohen found out about Joanne, and now I'm starting to freak out.
Oh, I'm doing the math. You can't become a head rabbi if you have a shiksa as a girlfriend. What does a shiksa think about that?
She's being really cool about it. Mostly because she doesn't know about it. I think maybe it is the time to ask her if she'd ever consider converting.
Have you never talked to her about the big C?
I think that's cancer, but no, I haven't. I want to. I just need it to be perfect. So help me out at dinner and make being Jewish seem really, really awesome, okay?
Wait, so basically you're asking me, like, soft lunch Judaism?
I want you to close it for me, baby.
Hell yeah.
I absolutely love this series. I binged the entire thing in a week. Terrible, I know. That was a clip from Nobody Wants This on Netflix. So what is it like to fall for someone who doesn't share the same religion and culture as you, especially when one partner is committed to their faith? How are these challenges navigated? Well, I'm joined now by Vanessa Almila, who knows exactly what that entails. Good morning and welcome to you, Vanessa.
Good morning, Zara. It's lovely to be here.
Well, Vanessa, I want to know, did you have as lovely a meet cute as Kristen Bell did with Adam Brody in this?
Do you know, I think I did.
Tell us, how did you meet your husband?
Well, we met at a party and actually we just had a really great conversation. There was no, there was no pressure for anything to be more than just a really engaging conversation. At the end of the evening, he asked me for my number to take me out for dinner. He said he'd take me anywhere in Edinburgh as a student at Edinburgh University at the time. And I was a little nervous because I didn't really know him that well. He was 4 years older than me, but I did go along to dinner in the end. And I had a pretty instantaneous feeling that I had found my person. I was only about 22 at the time, but we just got on like a house on fire, and it went pretty quickly from there. And I can really relate to the show in the sense that
so you've watched it, you've seen the...
I've seen the show.
Isn't it fab?
Yes, I absolutely love the show. It's so joyful. It's such a joyful love story, especially, you know, dealing with representing the Jewish faith and somebody that's agnostic, and those challenges, those barriers, love barriers, perhaps.
Would you have considered yourself agnostic?
Yes.
Back then? And so
Yes.
at what point did you know that faith, that in particular Judaism, was going to be a central part to your relationship, or your converting would have to be a central role within the
Yes.
relationship?
Yeah, well, we had a few sticky conversations. Maybe that's the wrong word, but we had some uncomfortable conversations. We realized we wanted to be together forever pretty quickly. And I suppose we were thinking about the future and family. Maybe we weren't quite confident enough to say those words yet. But I got the message that it was really important to Rael, my husband, now husband. And I was curious, I suppose, to find out more. I'd definitely been on my own spiritual quest. Before that, I was reading a lot of books around faith, religion, philosophy. I was curious enough to explore it more. So,
And did you feel that if the relationship wouldn't necessarily have been able to continue if you didn't convert?
I remember we sort of danced around it, and I remember Rael saying, "I don't know what's going to happen
Okay.
if this question or this thing isn't dealt with." We had to look at it. Which resulted in me emailing a rabbi at the Liberal Synagogue in St. John's Wood, where we were living at the time, and asking to have a conversation with her. And she was absolutely fantastic, because I didn't want to change any beliefs, or I didn't want to change who I was and what I thought about the world and my ethics and principles. And I was worried that I would be sort of forced into something that wasn't necessarily me. But the rabbi was fantastic. I met her and she said, listen, she said, put conversion to one side. Let's just explore Judaism, find out the culture of your partner, just get to know it. And we can deal with that stuff later on if it comes up.
My mother converted to Islam when she met my father, and it was very important for her, very important for him really to have a Muslim wife, whereas she had come from a Protestant Christian background and didn't consider herself to be particularly religious. And it's, I don't think the relationship definitely wouldn't have lasted had she not converted to Islam. And, it's hard to imagine what our lives would have looked like if sharing two different religions as well. I think they wanted that clarity for raising children as well, which I can see has in many ways been helpful, because of course there's difference in culture as well. But when we're watching stories of similar people who've converted, we always look for the similarities and the differences. And did you find yourself watching this Netflix series and thinking, that's completely accurate, that's exactly how it happened, or were there things that just didn't ring true for you?
So there were really tender moments, like actually how much they were into each other. Ren and I were exactly the same. That felt really solid, and I could relate to that. It's a comedy, so they had caricatured a lot of the characters on both sides, a lot of the Jewish women.
They're very stereotypical, or superficially drawn.
Superficially drawn, and I would say that I was totally embraced by Rael's Orthodox Jewish family. They sent me books. They
would have loved for you to convert.
They were so excited about me going on this journey. So I felt nothing but love and support, particularly by the women in the family. So I would say that's
a really lovely story. It's really encouraging to hear, actually, because it was the one thing that I did think, gosh, it's such a shame that they're experiencing so much resistance. Similarly, my mother was embraced fully, to go out to Pakistan, to get married out there, to have a proper Muslim ceremony, and she felt very loved and embraced. And I thought, gosh, it's lovely to have that support.
It's amazing to have that support. It's completely enriched my life. And the one thing, as my late father-in-law said, the only thing he said about me as a prospective wife was to my husband. He said, look, Rael, just remember where you come from. And that's all he said with regards to the matter. But no, totally embraced.
And what about your family? How did they accept the changes?
Interesting. So my mother's a very spiritual person on her own spiritual quest. My parents met in an ashram. So yeah, she's on her own journey. She reminded me of Joanne's mum, actually, and that really touched me in the show. That's a little bit like my mother. She's fabulous. But my grandmother and my grandfather had a big hand in my upbringing. My grandfather was actually one of the first soldiers to liberate Bergen-Belsen.
Wow.
And I remember having the conversation. I shared with him that I had met somebody, I was in love, and he said, "Oh, we must get this chap to come and stay for the weekend." And I said very nervously, "Well, don't get the bacon out the freezer." To which there was absolute silence. And my grandmother's face just fell. And then there was like, he's not Jewish, is he? Was the question I was faced with. And I think actually we spoke a lot. I think he had a lot of fear around anti-Semitism. And I guess he was looking forward as well and worrying about my future children and what that might entail for them.
But it must be so lovely now that you have these new customs and new traditions. And tell us a little bit about what life is like for you now as a Jewish wife and Jewish mother and Jewish woman.
I love it. Love it. So I love some of the traditions. Shabbat, when you close the week, that lovely, beautiful cycle of the week where we light candles. I feel it's so important. I have 3 girls, and when we light the candles together, we're really connecting with our ancestors in so many ways. And I really felt it's important to do that for the girls. And they really, really adore the cultural side.
There's so many very distinctive traditions, isn't there?
Yeah. The thing that stands out to me is, above all, is the celebration of children and acknowledging their worth. So we always have a dinner party on a Friday with family and friends outside of our faith, but children are really central to the conversation. Mm-hmm. And yes, the other thing, like the Pesach Seder, children are encouraged to ask why, to ask questions, which I just adore. So yeah, it's so family orientated. It's beautiful.
It's so lovely to hear your story, and that you're no longer, what was the word, a shiksa?
Yes. Although nobody ever said that to me. So that was the first time I heard that word on the show.
Really? That's something they say behind your back, perhaps.
Yeah.
Well, it's been so lovely to chat to you, Vanessa. Thank you so much for coming in, for telling us about your story, and of course for sharing your thoughts on Nobody Wants This, which is currently streaming on Netflix. And here's something from the series.
Pretty little angel eyes, pretty little angel eyes, pretty little angel, pretty little angel, pretty little, pretty little, pretty little angel. Pretty, pretty little angel eyes.
Angel eyes, I really love you so. Angel eyes, I'll never let you go, because I love you, my darling angel eyes.
Pretty, pretty, pretty little angel eyes.
Angel eyes, you are so good to me, and when I'm in your arms, you feel so heavenly. You know I love you, my darling angel eyes. I know you were sent from heaven above to fill my life with your wonderful love. I know we'll be happy for eternity, 'cause I know, that our love is really real. Angel eyes, I really love you so. Angel eyes, I'll never let you go, because I love you, my darling angel eyes.
Pretty little angel eyes, pretty little angel eyes, pretty little angel, pretty little angel, pretty little, pretty little, pretty
Angel eyes,
with me, Zara Janjua. And my spiritual life guest today is the best-selling author Kate Moss, who has 10 novels and short story collections. Kate's books, including the massive bestseller Labyrinth, have sold over 8 million copies, been translated into 38 languages and published in 42 countries. Her latest novel, The Map of Bones, is the fourth book in the Joubert family chronicles. Kate, it is a pleasure to have you on the programme this morning. We will be coming to your upbringing and your family life in just a minute, but let's kick off with the book itself.
Thank you. Well, it's lovely to be here. Morning, everybody. It is my first day at home for several weeks. I have a whole day at home, so that is really brilliant.
Well, you obviously have been incredibly busy, Kate.
Yes, I've been on the road meeting readers, which I love. I absolutely love. But there is nothing like your own bed, as we all know.
100%.
Yes, The Map of Bones is, I suppose, it's an adventure detective story in a way. It's a thriller. It's set in Southern Africa in the 17th century and the 19th century. And it's the fourth of a series, although you can read it on its own, that have been set against the backdrop of the diaspora of the Huguenots. So the first book began in 1562 at the outbreak of the Wars of Religion in France, and it ends with The Map of Bones, which is just out in Southern Africa in 1862. And the novel is about a young woman in the 17th century. She is a Huguenot. She and her grandmother have been forced to flee France. Finally, they have been forced to flee, realizing that even their status and their money will no longer protect them from the people who want to, eradicate the Huguenots, essentially. And that's just the name for the French Protestants. And she realizes that the only way to kind of live a life that she wants to live is to look outside of her own very traumatic experiences. And she becomes obsessed with finding out what happened to another woman in her family, a pirate commander called Louise, who sailed to the Cape in the 1620s and then vanished and was never heard of again. So it is a detective story. And then later in the 19th century, another woman of the Joubert family comes, Isabel, because she has realized that if women do not write their own stories down, we disappear from history. So it is a story about the power of words. It's the story about religious conflict. It's the story about being a pioneer. But most of all, the nicest thing readers have been saying to me is, I couldn't put it down.
Well, as is the case with all of your books, I would say. Kate, I remember, I think we spoke, was it back in Wigtown Book Festival? Was it last year, perhaps? I think
last year.
We spoke then, and I have been working my way through your books ever since and enjoying them, and I can definitely attest to that. They're very, very difficult to put down. But one of the things I enjoy the most about your writing is that you write brilliant women, really great, strong, they're all character-driven novels, but they're pioneering women. They are strong, they're fierce, there's lots going on with them, they're very complex at times. Why were you drawn to these kinds of women and these kinds of characters?
Well, that's what women are like. The key thing about this is that often one gets the impression that women have not made much of a contribution because the history books have left us out. But the truth is that women in their time were doing everything alongside the men. And the way that I write isn't about taking lovely, wonderful men out. It is about putting the women back in where they always were. Because it's the writing of history, not the living of history, that has written out strong women. In this period of time in The Map of Bones, the refugees who arrived in the Cape in 1688, they were impoverished and traumatized. They had nothing but the clothes they stood up in. They didn't even have, many of them, shoes on their feet. Yet they built a new world together for themselves. They planted vines, they planted food and vegetables, they ran farms. The women and the men were doing all of those things together. And the women were having maybe as many as 14 children.
Wow.
Good Lord. So for me, all of my writing is just saying, this is what real life was like. It's just the writing of the history books have given the impression that women just sat in the court and did nothing. This is real history, not slightly massaged history.
Does it feel like you're on a sort of quest to readdress that balance? Was it a conscious decision for you to say, I want to write these books so that we are addressing the issue that women have been left out of the history books? Or was it just you were drawn to, the history and writing brilliant women anyway?
Well, yes and no, but I suppose for me, every book, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, I write both, starts with place before anything else. So it is being in a particular place. In this case, obviously, it was Southern Africa, and it was a place called Franschhoek, which is a beautiful, what they call a Cape Dutch town, about 30 kilometers east of Franschhoek. And I was there and I stumbled upon this story of the Huguenot refugees who had come there, and I didn't know anything about it. And I went to the museum, and then I walked into the graveyard, and I was very moved seeing all of the old French names, de Villiers, Jourdain, Joubert, of course, on the gravestones. And I looked up at the mountains that ringed the town, and I thought, what would it have been like to have grown up hearing about the land you were forced to flee? Nobody chooses to be a refugee, and that you had never even seen, going back 300 years of history. And then you arrived here on the other side of the world, and it looked like home. Wow. And at that moment, I thought I could write that story, a story of a positive story about being a refugee and the possibility of a new life. And then I had this very strong image of a woman in 19th century clothes leaning forward to rub the lichen off one of the gravestones to reveal the name written there. And at that moment, I thought, okay, I don't know who she is, and I don't know who she's come to find and who's in the earth, but I know I can write that story. So for me, it's the place and what I call the whispering in the landscape.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's who are the characters who would be in this place? Oh, it's her. And as I start to write, I learn who she is.
And this is what you do. You sort of walk a lot of your research, don't you? You
yes,
walk
all of
through.
it.
I find that fascinating, and actually even the writing process, because, you know, as we mentioned when we were introducing you, over 8 million copies have been sold, translated in 38 languages. Everyone sort of, when you hear of success in writing, people want to know about your process and how you replicate some of that. And I hear that you start writing at around 4 o'clock in the morning. Is that right?
Yes, well, as I'm getting older, I'm in my mid-60s now, I'm tipping slightly later. So I'm now starting nearer to 5 o'clock.
Oh, how awful.
But how awful. Yes, absolutely. But yes, I do, because that's the time when I am most in touch with my characters, if you like. You know, I go to bed very early when I'm writing, and I get up very early, and it's not a dream state at all. I'm very practical and straightforward, but it's something like at that liminal state when you are awake, but you're not yet in the real world, as it were. And because I'm a carer, a full-time carer, and have been on and off for 15 years, and have been, well, I still am a parent, but my children have grown up and now a grandparent. Anybody listening who has a house with people in it and caring responsibilities will understand that when people, particularly if you're caring for older people, when they need something, they need it. You can't say, I'm just finishing this chapter. So for me, part of getting up very early is about protecting that creative time for myself early in the day when I'm less likely to be needed. And so that then I already have maybe 4, possibly even 5 hours work under my belt, which means that if then once the day starts and the dishwasher is broken and the Hoover doesn't work and all of these things, you know what it's like. You can always go back to work. It's the starting of it each day. So it's a mixture of my natural instinct, which is to be early and creative early, but also just family responsibilities.
Well, I can tell you, I do write also, and that is not my natural instinct to write at 4 o'clock in the morning. But this is clearly where I'm going wrong. So, but we very much appreciate your advice on that one. But now let's hear some music now, because you have chosen a track for us this morning, Kate, and it is "While You See a Chance" by Steve Winwood. Tell us why you chose it.
Well, well done for finding it, because I couldn't remember actually what it was called. Your researcher was very hard. I was like,
we've got a good team.
It was a good team. We made a good team. Well, it was because, I had a very happy childhood, very happy growing up, a mile from where I'm talking to you now. And then I was doing an exam to go to university, and I had what now is called a gap year, but then was not a gap year. And I was going to make a bit of money before I started university the following year. And so I left Sussex and went to London. And I didn't know anybody. I was doing a secretarial course because that's what girls and women of my age did, and we all expected would be secretaries when we started. And I would go to the course every day, and I found a rented flat, quite a long way out. I didn't realise how far out it was. And genuinely, it was quite possible to go home on a Friday and not speak to anybody until Monday. Now, looking back, I can see that did me a lot of good. It made me more resilient. It made me understand that there is great pleasure in your own company, and you can find plenty of things to do. But I was a very sociable person who'd grown up in a busy house, had younger sisters. And so I was lonely. And this song, when it would come on the radio, about, well, you see a chance, take it, it always uplifted my spirits. And I realized that that is what I've always done throughout my whole life. If somebody offers you an opportunity, my parents brought my sisters and I up to believe, well, have a go. If you fail, you dust yourself down, you get up and you do something else, but never limit your life because of fear of failure. So this song, in a way, sums all of that up for me.
It's such a lovely story, and actually I think, I can certainly relate to that time period when you're younger and you want life to begin and you feel like you're spending a lot of time. I also spent a lot of time by myself in my bedroom, and so and working with my imagination, and so I think for that reason this is just such a fabulous track. So let's have a listen to it now. That was a lovely song there, While You See a Chance, by Steve Winwood, chosen by my spiritual life guest this week, Kate Moss, who is still with me. Kate, thank you for choosing that track for us this morning. Now, you mentioned earlier that you are currently, did you say it was 1 mile away from where you were born in Chichester?
Yes, absolutely, yes.
And that was in 1961. You had, in many ways, what sounds like an idyllic childhood, growing up with your parents and your two younger sisters. At what point did faith come into your family? Am I right in thinking it was your grandfather and aunt who were the religious ones?
Well, no, we went to church every Sunday. It was, I come from a very traditional English C of E family, I suppose. And my mother was the deputy leader of the Guides, and my father was on the parish council. And my grandfather was a vicar, and my father had therefore grown up in a vicarage. And many of his aunts and uncles were married to, well, not the uncles in those days, of course, were married to vicars. So it was just something that was. And my aunt, as you mentioned, was an amazing woman called the Reverend Margaret Booker. And she was one of in the second batch, as I always like to think about, of women who were ordained in Chelmsford in April 1994. And it was a great honour and pleasure to be there. And my godmother was an Anglican nun. So it was just that it was one of those things that we did on a Sunday. Mm-hmm. We went to church, and I was, the first girl to serve in the cathedral in Chichester Cathedral. And the bishop then, Eric Kemp, Bishop Eric, was extremely opposed to women doing anything other than flowers in the church. And so I was just simply told to put my hair down the back of my cassock and that he wouldn't notice. And indeed, he did not notice.
Wow. It seems like you were met with some resistance initially. It sort of explains in many ways why you potentially chose the path you did in terms of what you write, because, as we mentioned before, very strong women, but you also have this fascination. Your imagination has been captivated by religious history. Why is that?
Well, I think because if you live in Europe, I mean, of course, this is true for all over the world, but Europe is where my writing is mostly based, except for the Map of Bones. Mm-hmm. It is the history of the continent, that everywhere you go, in England in particular, but other countries as well, the first thing you see as the traveller comes over the hill is a spire. And the church is at the heart of every community, and it is inextricably linked with the history of this country and France and Italy. And of course, the horrible truth is that much of that history is appalling. I mean, it is very far from being salutary in any sort of way. But the other side of it is that it is our island story. And so I've always been interested in faith and the consequences of faith, war and the consequences of war. And of course, the knowledge that religion and faith are not the same, that most wars of religion are about power, about land, about influence. They're not about faith. Mm-hmm. The faith has gone a very long way from, it's been hollowed out, if you like. And so for me, writing those histories has been very important because I'm interested in that. And when I was once in America, when I was doing a book tour for Labyrinth, I had a very interesting experience. Mm-hmm. The history of the Cathars is a very long way from Black American experience. But when I was doing events in America, I found I had huge numbers of people from Black American churches who wanted to talk about the persecution of the Cathars, because again, that sense of certain groups being persecuted within something that should be precisely the opposite, should be about welcoming everybody. It still is something that's very important. And of course, we are seeing it in the world today, when a great deal of the conflict is being fueled by people who have different points of view about how to worship.
Kate, I can't believe our time is running out this morning. I've got so much that I wanted to ask you and to dive into your own history. But just very briefly, I wonder whether you could tell me, I mean, next year is the 20th anniversary of your best-selling novel Labyrinth, and you're bringing it to stage. We, of course, would absolutely love to have you back then to talk about it. But how are the preparations going? What's for you next?
Well, it's a wonderful thing. The Labyrinth is 20 years old next year. It was a book that changed my life. It made it possible for me to be a full-time writer. I became an overnight success at the age of 44 after 4 previous books. And it's a novel that I love, and it means a great deal to me. And I know it does to many readers. So I'm going to bring it to a stage. It's a one-woman show, 2.5, 3 hours in the theatre. It will be about the story behind the writing of Labyrinth. It will be about the real history behind Labyrinth. Who were the Cathars, the Nazi Grail hunters, the proliferation of labyrinths as a sort of spiritual thing in Europe in the 13th century. And what I'm really hoping is wherever I go, that people will come and bring their stories of when they first read the book and what it means to them. So if people go on my website, you'll see where I'm going, and I'm travelling up and down the country, although we haven't got a Scottish date yet because none of the Scottish theatres were available.
Oh, really?
So we need to get, they were like, we're not available. So, go on the website and you might have to come a little bit south of the border.
Well, happy to travel, very happy to travel. Kate, thank you so much for sharing your spiritual life with us this morning. It has been wonderful. I do wish you the very best with your new novel. And I'm delighted to say that The Map of Bones by Kate Moss is out now, released this week, and you can find it online and in all good bookshops. Coming up at 10 is the Sunday show on BBC Radio Scotland and on BBC One Scotland. They'll of course be reflecting on the life of former First Minister Alex Salmond, who died yesterday at the age of 69. And joining them are First Minister John Swinney and former First Minister Lord McConnell. That's the Sunday show with Gary Robertson and Laura McIver from 10 o'clock. But coming up with me just after 9, I'll be joined by writer and theologian Greg Garrett, Islamic scholar Yahya Barry, and author and anti-racism facilitator Brianna Pagado, as our panel looks through a faith lens at some of the stories that have caught our eye this week. lives, and that's, of course, after the very sad news that former First Minister Alex Salmond died yesterday. And we'll be exploring the US election in a week that has seen talk about reproductive rights from the former First Lady Melania Trump, as well as widespread disinformation and mistrust as a result of Hurricane Milton in Florida. Plus a look at the importance of reclaiming narratives, the theme of this year's Black History Month being marked in the UK just now. And finally, why is it some art is held in higher regard than others? And who gets to decide? Well, that's something we'll be chatting about after a piece in a Dutch gallery almost accidentally ended up in landfill this week. Dear, oh dear. But let's get our second hour started with this, though, from Prince. That was Prince with Raspberry Beret. Now, as we've been hearing in the news, Alex Salmond, former First Minister and one of the major figures in Scottish politics over the last 4 decades, died yesterday. There will be a full analysis of that to come in at Sunday Show at 10 o'clock. But at this landmark moment in Scottish political and cultural life, I want to start by asking our panel, does the passing of major figures help shape our sense of eras, history, and give us pause to reflect on our own lives? Well, as I say, joining me this morning are Brianna Pagado, Greg Garrett, and Yahya Barry. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's so nice to have everyone in the studio with us this morning as well. Thank you. Now, Greg, how do you cope with news like this, the shock really of learning something like this, that someone that has been so instrumental in politics, or someone who we know through TV and through their work has passed?
Yeah, it's one of the things that I'm particularly interested in, because what I do is mostly what I would think of as cultural theology. So I look at what's going on in the culture, and I look at literature, and I study politics. And so when you have a figure like this who passes, I think you're right to say that they sort of encapsulate an era, and you have to go back and reflect on it. So I think particularly about some of the people who passed during America's civil rights era. And most of those people that we think about passed prematurely and violently. And the person that I'm most drawn to is actually the person who outlived his fame to an extent, James Baldwin, the great writer and activist. And his death in 1987 sort of reminded people that, oh, yeah, this was all a thing that happened. This is not distant history. This is not these people, who died in 1963 or 1965 or 1968. It's ongoing. And so I think one of the things that the death of a figure like this can help us to do is not just to think about, okay, this was a period of time that this person was a part of, but what sort of ongoing questions does this death help us to think about? And so a figure like Baldwin, a figure like I'm sure that Brianna or Yaya will talk with us about, can help us do this sort of continuing assessment of that person's life and work and think about where do we need to go from here.
Because it very much marks the end of their era. So you reflect on what they have achieved in their life and that work that's still to come. What about you, Yaya? Whose passing has had an effect on you?
When I think about it, it's going to have to be Nelson Mandela, because, such an iconic figure, what he stood for, what he achieved in his lifetime, and that whole message of peace, reconciliation. So I remember, him passing away, it was almost like, a light was removed from our world. And, it reminds you, number one, of the fact that, yes, we are all human. We are, in our Islamic theology, death is described as one of the things that we are certain of. And it's also, it's described as every soul shall taste it. So it's a reminder that, yes, we will all have to depart one day. And regardless of how great, these figures are, they are fallible and human. And our role is, what positive and light can we get from their lives to, get that to inspire us. But also to ask us what kind of mark and legacy do you want to leave behind too.
That's an interesting question, isn't it? What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind in life? And I think even when someone passes, you can have that moment of reflection where you think, actually, first of all, gratitude for the time that you have, and what do I want to do with it? What kind of legacy do I want to leave? Brianna, is there a landmark figure whose passing sort of defined your life or posed questions and made you reflect?
Yeah, when I hear kind of Greg and Yaya talking about James Baldwin and Nelson Mandela. Mandela was huge in our household. My mom went with the US contingent to meet Mandela when he came out of prison because she was there representing the US government. We always talked about his legacy. And when I think about significant figures, there was someone that came to mind recently in the last week. It was Dame Maggie Smith. And I know that, when you think about her legacy as a woman, who, as an actress, as someone that has been so central in so many stories in our lives, whether or not it's Downton Abbey, it's Harry Potter. Obviously, she had some other massive roles. But when I think about my generation and age and the character that she represented, I read recently that Daniel Radcliffe only was auditioned for Harry Potter because Dame Maggie Smith told the director that he needed to audition Daniel Radcliffe. So when we think about these figures that have held such important space for us, that have been able to support others coming after them, I think she represents those so much just in terms of our relationship to cultural figures. And when we grow up with someone or we see them on screen or hear them all the time, we might imagine what they're like. We don't know what they're like in person, but kind of that relationship that we build with these figures that are so visible and so incredible, but are complex human beings, really bring into question, often as well, what do we think not only our legacy might be, but how we're perceived, and what that actually reflects who we are on the inside and what these figures are as humans.
And of course, that story with Daniel Radcliffe, it really hits home just the effect that all of us have on other people's lives and how much we can touch people's lives. Thank you all very much. Just a reminder that, of course, we will be talking about the passing of Alex Salmond in further detail on the Sunday show. That's with Gary Robertson and Laura McIver from 10 o'clock. But now let's move on this morning. So with just over 3 weeks to go to the US election, it's the final chance for Kamala Harris and Donald Trump to win the favour of voters. Now, many Americans living in Scotland will have now sent off their ballot cards, and in the States, a number of policy points are coming up again and again. In the past week, Melania Trump has been in the headlines too, of course, because her book, simply titled Melania, was published this week, and among many of the topics, she declared her pro-choice stance regarding abortion. So, here to discuss this morning, of course, are Yahya Barry, Brianna Pagado and Greg Garrett. Greg, what is the mood just now in America? Talk to us about that.
Well, it's a big country, so I can't speak for all 300 some million of us. It is a very close election, and there is this sense of very sharp division, which we've experienced most strongly over the last 9 years. And in many of the conversations that I have with people on different issues and from different demographics, one of the things that strikes me is most interesting and maybe most devastating about these last 9 years is that half of America inhabits a different media landscape and information landscape than the other half of America. And it becomes very difficult to even have conversations about what is real and what is not real. And so over the last couple of weeks, one of the things that's really been very interesting is because of some of the natural disasters.
Oh, gosh, yes, of course.
There have been, tremendous heartache, tremendous loss. I have a number of friends in Florida and in North Carolina that have been victimized by the storm.
Sorry to hear that.
But there are these information ecosystems in which people to the right and the far right are talking about the government's response to it, and making that a politicized response. And using these natural disasters as a way of trying to to bolster the support for the conservatives and for the Republicans in the coming election. And so one of the interesting things that's happened over the last week is just the simple sort of question about, will people acknowledge actual facts about what's on the ground? And so we have had prominent legislators in the American Congress who have talked about how the Democrats are controlling the weather in order to attack their constituents. Yes, that actual thing. And then we've had a number of Republican politicians who have gone on the air or have gone on record to say the government is doing everything that we would ask it to do. They're being so helpful. But it's such a divided country right now that even the simple act of accepting help can have political consequences.
I'm going to come to Brianna because she's nodding here at the moment, just beside us. Is it the case that voters of faith are feeling conflicted at the moment in America?
Well, it's a big question because I think that question gets into what people's relationship is to their faith. And I think that when we're thinking about the values people might have at the center of their lives and their communities and their faith, for some people, it's more clear than it ever was. I think for others who maybe are moving away from organized religion, moving away from institutions, are really questioning, can we trust the institutions that help govern our world? So when we're talking about relationship to media, relationship to the government, whether or not that's big or small in the US, I think there are kind of generational trends we're seeing of younger people and people of all ages, excuse me, people of all age, but particularly young people who are asking, okay, if we can't trust institutions or our media sources and we have to wade through this kind of information around us, I think actually people are leaning into their values and what's important to them and seeing the actions that our political figures are taking, maybe not just what they're saying, and using that to try and distinguish and determine who they might support. Because there is a crisis in the way our institutions organize. And it doesn't mean that there will be no institutions. It doesn't mean that we can't move through this. But distributed power, people having more access to information, to more resources, maybe than they did in in the past means that maybe we're looking at different ways to relate to our kind of political power and institutions. But I think people of faith might have even more clear decisions than they did in the past, or are kind of looking at their values to guide them, maybe rather than parties or the ways they might have traditionally voted.
Well, it's not surprising, of course, that many politicians do tap into religious groups because of the influence that has existed there and still exists, has always existed. But is there a risk in that, Yahya?
There's a huge risk, Zara, and hearing Brianna talk about things like our institutions, the lack of trust in them and the establishment, and basically people of religion or faith, kind of shopping for other places where they can fulfill their needs. And for me, there's a huge risk in that because number one, religion can be that kind of divisive force that can, not only tear communities apart, but set them one against another. And I think that's why for me, one of the key things that I want to talk about is vigilance, that, as a global community, we need to be vigilant and hold our politicians to account and our political systems accountable, that they do not use religion and faith as a dividing force. And, when I look at contexts where that has worked very well, I remember going with the Church of Scotland on a tour of Ghana, looking at Ghana as a kind of a case model of where there are effective interfaith relations. And we looked at different domains, and the politics was one of them, that, in Ghana, it's not allowed for religion to basically be used as a tool, despite the fact that sometimes the religious vote can be a dividing factor between who wins and who loses. So similarly, like in the US, where it's so close, neck and neck, one of the politicians playing that religious card can tip the balance. But then again, as I said, we have to be vigilant and say, look, if you're going to use something like, let's say, the Israel-Gaza conflict, or if you're going to use, let's say, Islamophobia, you're going to ride on a populist, wave, then, we should not allow you to do that if you're going to stoke hate. And especially in the climate that we're in, where, if you look at the Global Risk Perception Survey, misinformation, disinformation, one of the hugest risks facing humanity. And in a context where people are spreading fake news and, using that to manipulate, electoral outcomes, I think that what's upon us and our religious communities and leaders is even greater scrutiny, and ensuring that we work to, ensure that our politicians don't use us to divide us and our communities.
It's interesting to hear that there's been that distinction in Ghana, as you mentioned, the separation between politics and religion, and I think it clearly helps to avoid any corruption potentially within religion. But Greg, I wanted to ask, okay, so there's a podcast that Kamala does, and she shared her pro-choice values, and this came as a result of Melania's book being released. How much influence do you think these opinions from Melania Trump and Kamala Harris regarding abortion will have on the way that people choose to vote?
Oh, that is a huge issue. It is abortion rights and women's rights to control their own health have shaped a number of elections over the last 3 or 4 years, and particularly since the Supreme Court dismantled the protections in Roe versus Wade. I think what's really interesting is that Melania Trump, and I have given her very little thought over the years, but she is this strange cipher that people project their own needs and aspirations on. Yeah. So, because she has been largely absent, both in Trump's presidency and in his long-standing reelection bid, there are some more progressive women who think, well, she must be on our side. And for her to come out in terms of a pro-choice position, some people could regard it that. It could also be regarded as a very sort of manipulative stance that she's taking to help in some way support her husband, who was instrumental in dismantling these rights for women. But I think what's really important is that, Yahya was talking about our values, and Brianna also, the core values of religion. And what is actually coming out in this election is that religious people are lining up on both sides, not just of the choice issue, the abortion issue, but also on the political issues. And so we have white Christian nationalists who are leaning very hard into questions of power and privilege and talking about how, in their view, their religion, should keep them enthroned. And then we've got Kamala Harris talking about how her faith, and she's a devout Baptist, how her faith determines the stances that she takes on issues as well. And so instead of there being this sort of monolithic idea that for many years, if you were Christian, you had to vote Republican, in this election particularly, there have been a number of different religious groups that have come out to support the Harris-Walz ticket. And so I've done interviews with people who are experts on white Christian nationalism and with people in that group. And I have family members who are in that group. And I've interviewed people in this new group called Evangelicals for Harris, which it sort of makes my brain explode because that phrase would not have been possible, I think, before Donald Trump.
I mean, it's fascinating, the landscape in politics at the moment across in the US and just how much that's changing and shifting. Of course, we're not there yet. We've got a few more weeks to go, so I think we'll be watching that very closely. But for now, I think we could have continued on this topic for at least another half an hour quite easily. Thank you so much, Greg Garrett, Brianna Pagado and Yahya Barry. You'll be with me for the next hour discussing the importance of reclaiming narratives, the theme for this year's Black History Month, plus the importance of art. Is beauty truly in the eye of the beholder? And who gets to decide who that beholder is? But first, Emily Sandé. That was Emily Sandé with Next to Me. Now, October is Black History Month in the UK, a time to reflect on and champion Black history and culture. This year, the theme is reclaiming narratives as institutions and society make a shift towards recognising and correcting inaccuracies and shining a light on untold stories. Now, we obviously have Greg, Yahya and Brianna. Brianna, can you just reflect a little bit on what that means, reclaiming narratives. What does that mean to you, and what is that as a theme this year?
I think reclaiming narratives is huge when it comes to Black History Month, and as we're reflecting on what October means for us in Scotland. And in particular, when I think about 2010, which was my first year here in Scotland, I was at university, showing my age, and the University of Edinburgh had never celebrated Black History Month before in its history. So this is, 1583 up until 2010, and we set up the first Black History Month at the University of Edinburgh, and the whole question was, what does it mean in this context now? When I look at more recently, particularly in the last year, I've been doing a lot of work with arts institutions, galleries, museums, particularly Historic Environment Scotland, Crafts Scotland, Glasgow museums, and there's been a lot of kind of research that has been coming out recently about what are these legacies, legacies to empire, legacies to the slave trade, but also how are we reframing and reshaping our relationship to what it means to be Black in Scotland, what these untold stories are. I think of Malvina Wells, who is one of the first freed Black people who lived in the West End of Edinburgh, and her gravestone is becoming this pilgrimage site, St. John's Church in the West End. And again, as we're talking about these narratives, I think we're still kind of unpicking and exploring Scotland's long history and relationship to, slavery, empire. But when we think about this kind of in terms of the untold stories and narratives, who are the people that have shaped Scotland, that have been here long before that time, who have contributed to culture, to the Enlightenment, to inventions, to what it means to be Scottish, and how can we continue to kind of embed that throughout the year, but also this whole kind of beautiful opportunity to reclaim narratives is about whose history and stories are we telling, whose histories and stories are we finding, rediscovering and re-identifying, and how do we honour them?
Well, earlier in the programme we were speaking to best-selling author Kate Moss, and she was discussing women's history and the fact that women always had a place in history but not in the history books. Is it a similar case, Yahya? I mean, you're a Black Muslim. What do you think that there's enough in our history books, or do we need to keep finding and reclaiming the narratives that don't exist there in history books?
Yeah, I mean, I'll have to add to that. I'm not only a Black Muslim, I'm a Black African Muslim. I'm a BAM. You can't go saying that in Scotland. I know certain parts.
The triple threat.
And for me, hearing Brianna talk about, whose histories or whose narratives and stories are we telling, and for me, the fact that the powerful fact that from 1583 to 2010, the University of Edinburgh had not, recognised Black History Month. But actually, for me, when I talk about Black history, I mean, I've seen YouTube videos of people like, I think Samuel L. Jackson and Morgan Freeman saying, I don't want a Black History Month. And for me, when I think about it, I'm like, actually, the genie is out of the bottle. Black History Month is out here. It's an institution, and we celebrate. But for me, I would have preferred that we didn't have one, because why? As a Black man, as an African man, my history flows through me day in, day out. It's a part of my lived experience. And also, when I reflect on the kind of the different hats that I wear and the different areas that I work within, sometimes I just get this kind of palpable feeling that Black History Month can sometimes be a bit of a discomfort thing, where, when we talk about it's Black history, you get colleagues who are like, well, okay, what about my history then? So for me, what I'm leaning more towards is actually, how do you make the best of it? That now the genie's out of the bottle, how do we embrace this Black history? For me, the way I think of it and the way I try to reclaim the narrative is that this is actually our history. Because if you think about it, if, let's say the world, we've been used to particular paradigms and systems of governance and ways of living that have got us to what we've got to, maybe being provoked to talk about a Black history or other histories, can be refrained away of, well, can we think of other stories or other ways of seeing the world? And what can we learn from that? Can we be humble to consider other stories, other perspectives, and can we be empowered by them?
I appreciate you sharing your perspective, because it's an interesting one where there's maybe a layer of reflection in there that's not just about celebrating the history. It's sort of really thinking about, well, where do I fit into this? And I think that's very important. Greg, I'm interested to hear from you on this one, because you are in the UK part to talk about the American writer and activist James Baldwin, 100 years since his birth. And you wrote a book about him, The Gospel According to James Baldwin, What America's Great Prophet Can Teach Us About Life, Love and Identity. What are some of his lasting impacts?
Well, first, let me follow up very quickly on what Yaya was saying, because I as the straight, white, Christian man at the table today, one of the things that has to be acknowledged and isn't acknowledged is that our History Month is every month.
Yeah.
And so when, Brianna is talking about where are the untold stories, what's the unknown history, that's I think the function of this, and of February, which is Black History Month in the States, because many of those stories are subsumed by stories that people who look like me tell to keep themselves in a position of power and privilege. Mm-hmm. And what Baldwin offers us, both black and white, is the very tangible recognition that we have to acknowledge and tell our stories. Baldwin talks a lot about history. He says we are made up of our history, and until we know our history and acknowledge it, then we can't be healed of it. And one of the things that is most distressing to me in the States right now, separate from any sort of political election, is that many of our state legislatures and many of our national figures are trying to control which narratives get taught in schools, which books are available in libraries. And of course, they're privileging people who look like me. So if we want to hear the stories of LGBTQ people, if we want to hear the stories of Black or Hispanic people, if we want to hear the stories of women, there is this conscious drive in America that is an anti-Baldwin initiative to bury our history and to continue to live in White History Month, month after month after month. Mm-hmm. And so what Baldwin offers us is that challenge to both Black and white people, to all people, to tell the truth, to be a witness to what actually happened, to tell the stories and to unearth the stories, to bring forth the stories that have not been told, because we can't be who we're meant to be as a society. We can't live into our full humanity until we know all of the stories and who everybody around us actually is.
Well, it's great to see that some institutions really do embrace this month. Brianna, where are we seeing some of the greatest shifts and changes, and where are the institutions that have really done the work? Where are we finding the stories, new stories?
The work continues, but I think we can look at academic institutions in Scotland in particular. When we think about all of the work that's happening in terms of city councils, the Edinburgh City Council's looked at legacies of slavery and colonialism and what these mean for monuments. We have Historic Environment Scotland has just done its report on its kind of ties to kind of those legacies. But when we look at who is kind of celebrating Black History Month, the Coalition of Race, Equality and Rights has been doing lots of work in this for a long time. Mm-hmm. But there's so many different kind of parts of the Black History Month program that are taking place this month, from bookshops to lectures and talks that are happening all over the country. So I think that actually when it comes to where this is happening, it's our cultural institutions, it's our writers, it's our kind of academic institutions that are really kind of sharing these stories. And of course, it's our faith institutions as well. That are celebrating people that have been part of that tapestry for a long time, and also doing the kind of, it's not just about celebration. And I hear what Yaya is saying. I wish we didn't have to have a Black History Month. But when it comes to, I think, how we are relating to our history, who's been part of it, and also what kind of Greg's been saying about power and privilege. There's been power imbalances for so long. How do we rebalance that by giving people the recognition that is due, but also deeply understanding what our relationship has been to the past so that we can shape the future?
Well, it's interesting because we're talking about this, as you say, as a celebration. Black History Month is a celebration of Black history, but in that there's also very confronting dark history that needs to be addressed, isn't there? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, because, as long as the history is attached to humans, there's bound to be dark elements. Yeah. And I think it's in our ability to embrace that and to try to understand it, for its sake, not darkness for its sake, but to understand it so that we can, go into the light, And again, for me, my little life experiences always kind of teach me that, it's not about me or you, it's about us. Mm-hmm. We live in a world where, it's a very complex world. We have people of different ethnicities, colors, faiths, creeds, backgrounds, ideologies, orientations, and we're all in the same boat. Mm-hmm. So we have to learn about each other. And if we're presented with an opportunity to do so, then why not embrace it? That's the way I see it. And one thing I'm seeing different or increasing differently in this month is and really refreshing. I don't know how Brianna feels about it, where Black people who are approached to do stuff in Black History Month actually say, but now you have to pay us. You have to remunerate us for this lived experience because we are tired of people coming to us, Black History Month only, to do stuff for them.
Don't exploit unpaid labour. We have a long history of that. We don't need to continue it.
Oh, that's interesting. So you find that during this time, people are coming to you asking you to do things.
I've worked in so many arts organisations that were led by Black people and people of colour, and Black History Month is rife with free requests for free collaborations. So yes, please, it's a season. So please do compensate people for their labour around this time. Yes,
I think that all actually feels like a brilliant sentiment to end the discussion on is make sure if you're bringing Brianna or Yahya in to do any work this month, make sure they are well reimbursed for it, because I think that is a brilliant message to put out there. Thank you all so much. Now the Sunday Show with Gary Robertson and Laura McIver is coming up at 10, and they'll of course be reflecting on the death of former First Minister Alex Salmond, plus other major stories this week. Before that, we'll be looking at art next, namely who gets to decide what is and isn't valuable. But now that's
item. Chris really fancies her and he just can't stop flirting. She really hates it and is threatening to hurt him. The Chris Moyle Show. BBC Radio 1.
You're listening to Sunday Morning with me, Zara Janjua, and it is just after 9:45 a.m. Now, this week, a Dutch museum revealed that it saved one of its artworks just in the nick of time after it was accidentally thrown in the rubbish bin by an employee. A surprising mistake, you might think, but it does make a little bit more sense when you realise the work, which was created by French artist Alexandre Lavet, was just 2 crushed beer cans and it was on display in a lift. So who gets to decide what is and what isn't art? And in fact, who decides what isn't valuable culturally and socially, from ancient artefacts to religious iconography? Now, I am very delighted to, of course, have in the studio with me my fabulous panel. And Greg, Brianna and Yaya, I'm interested to know what you thought of this. Yaya, you saw the story. What did you think of the artwork, first and foremost?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? I mean, for example, I remember doing a little bit of art and coming across the works of like people like Andy Warhol, and how, you know, bits and pieces of abstract artwork can indeed, you know, capture the imagination and be regarded as art. But as a BAM, as a Black African Muslim man, you know, I think sometimes, you know, parts of the art world are reserved for particular people, and also within the culture sector. So, I sit on the board of Creative Scotland, and, you know, I have to give a huge shout out to that institution, you know, which is facing some significant challenges. But, you know, just saying that, you know, the culture sector right now, we really need to be together and ensure that we, you know, face these challenges head on. Sometimes I found myself in the boardroom and I'm like, oh my God, look, you know, these are huge strategic decisions being made. And, you know, sometimes I see myself like, hang on a sec, you know, do I even belong here? And it's very easy to feel that way about art and artwork in the art world.
It sounds like imposter syndrome.
Indeed, yeah. yes. But for me, I mean, I think the message is, yes, in our part of the world, I think certain parts of art can be reserved for socioeconomic elites.
Yeah.
And, you know, the question is, to what extent are we able to see, you know, art from other eyes and other perspectives?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I'm going to flip that on its head slightly, because I discovered recently my mother has been keeping, or has kept, artwork that I created when I was about 4 years old, 3 or 4 years old. She has kept all this time, and, you know, I was amazed and thinking, this is worthless, and why have you kept all of this? But to her, of course, it means something. Not all of us get to decide, or it's subjective, isn't it? That's what art really is. But how about when it comes to religious artefacts, Greg? You know, in Christianity, you know, you've got, of course, very poignant religious artefacts, the splinters, the true cross. You know, they've raised a lot of questions among scholars and theologians about authenticity in particular.
Yeah. And, you know, so we were talking about stories a second ago, and as a person who studies stories and writes stories and teaches stories, they're at the heart of how I understand life, and at the heart of how many of us understand our lives. It's how we order our existence. And so one of the things that I'm drawn to when we think about authenticity in terms of religious relics and religious, you know, the sort of religious meaning of it, is what's the story behind it? And sort of coming back to Yaya's thing about, you know, what is my own personal relationship to this? And so I have seen a number of relics. I'm a cathedral person. I love cathedrals, and, you know, just their works of art in themselves. But, you know, I have seen a number of sort of duplicate artifacts as I've, you know, traversed the West. And you have to ask yourself, people have come to this place for hundreds of years to visit this thing because of the story behind it. And it doesn't matter to them that there may be another true cross in Lisbon, you know, where people have been coming for hundreds of years. And so one of the interesting things about it, and in a very real sense, you know, faith is about what we put our faith in. Mm-hmm. And so the stories that we believe, and coming back again to the you know, why it's important to hear all the stories that we believe, the stories that touch us, are the stories that have significance for us and that we can build some sort of faith or meaning around. And so end of the day, it's like, you know, this is a good true cross. I like this true cross. I'm glad I'm here.
Brianna, is it more about those emotions that it conjures up? Is that why, it's important and it really also doesn't really matter?
Well, I spend most of my days thinking about this question because my entire career has been working with artists, working in arts institutions and in around them. And this whole question of what is art? What does it mean to be an artist is something that occupies most of my dinner table conversations.
Let's get into it then. Let's do it.
And I think, with art comes power. I mean, we can talk about organized art within institutions, curators, galleries, historical movements. We can talk about people who make art at home. I think the artist exists in all of us. And I think that obviously people have different skill levels or different, it's not even about skills, they have different kind of amounts of time they might spend making an artwork. But I think that artwork needs to evoke emotion. And that emotion can be, I think that's terrible. That is okay. And I think when we think about these two beer cans in this lift, what were the artists saying? Were they challenging the person interacting with it? Did they want you to think, why is this there? Did they want you to kind of question why it's in the lift? Why have they placed it there? I think, all of our artists throughout different movements in history at different points have been subversive, have helped us challenge things, have helped us world build, imagine different futures, different realities. And art should exist for art's sake. Art is important. Anyone should have access to it. Too many people don't. There are a lot of institutions that are elitist, or the way that the art's displayed is inaccessible to so many people. But fundamentally, art is about our expression, our creative expression, our relationship to the divine, our relationship to our world, how we interpret it and understand it. And I think that ultimately the question comes back to our listeners today. What is it to you? Could be nothing. But why is that?
Interesting. I want to dive a bit further into this because I'm loving this conversation. It seems like there's a balance between expression and story. And, I remember when I was in school going into maths and being given a formula and told, use the formula and you will get the result. And I said, but where does it come from? Where does the formula come from? What's the meaning of it? Why is it there? I wanted story. Whereas when I was in English, my teachers would say, there's no such thing as a wrong answer. As long as you can explain why you think what you think, then you'll get a point. And I thought, well, this is where I'm going to excel, which is where I did. But where is the balance between, as an artist, sort of expressing yourself and, providing a story for other people to connect to your expression?
So does that mean you're a brilliant mathematician then, Zara?
I'm terrible at that.
I mean, the experiential dimension, I think, is huge. And it's something that, I'll share a quick story where, so yes, I sit on the board of Creative Scotland. We do the whole arts culture across Scotland. But I had to admit to our organisation that actually quite a lot of this stuff I myself don't partake in, particularly because of my own worldview, my own faith. But it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate it. But one day I was invited to a Burns Night event, in Kelvingrove Art Galleries and Museums, and there was traditional Scottish music playing, and I found my soul moved in ways where in the 40+ years of my life I'd never experienced.
Welcome.
And and for me it was like, wow, I could understand why particular aspects of Islamic theology, let's say, have a certain code around, a lack of engagement with music, because it can move your soul in ways where you might lose control of it.
That's interesting. And were you up doing the gay gardens?
I didn't get quite to that level, but yeah, for me, it's all about experience, but also it's about, our connection as humans. And for me, I do find it sad sometimes, as Brianna said, that, access to parts of art and culture is reserved for the elites. Because why? Other people are just so busy surviving, they don't have the ability to thrive in the arts.
So connection, this is where we're arriving at the moment, Brianna, is this connection and the need to, art, I guess, is a platform in which you can do that with people.
Yeah.
So how have you connected with art? Did you connect with the beer cans?
Well, I did.
In your student days?
I connected with the fact that we had this incident that the cleaner in the gallery ended up putting them in the bin, right? And this comes back to, who has access to the art? What did that cleaner think of it? They were just doing their job, right? They were just doing their job. It was literal rubbish, but what did that piece represent, right? And I'm not saying this to be funny about it, but genuinely, I think art is all of these things. And, you know, we're at a particular point in our history, in the world, in Scotland, in the arts, where we are losing funding to the arts. Arts education is not being prioritised in schools, music. And it's so important because allowing us to think in different ways, engage with concepts we might not have before, ask the question of why are those beer cans there is really important. And I think back to what Greg was saying, and and back to even relics as well. It's like, does it matter the intention of the piece of work and what the artist has put out there? Of course it does. But also our connection to it, our relationship to it, the stories that we tell about this. And also for me, you know, I connected with art from a young age because I had a family that prioritized that. My mom was a ballet dancer, my grandpa was an actor, my grandmother was an English teacher. I had that privilege, but, you know, music, film, painting, dance has always been a big part of my life. And it's a question of, yes, how do we make sure it continues to be for other people?
Greg?
Well, I teach screenwriting and fiction writing, and my students are often, they want to express themselves, and that's incredibly important because that's one of the things that art does, is it allows you to express yourself, to tell your story. And so sort of going back to Zara's story, it's like, I give them a point for that. But I also think back to E.M. Forster's Only Connect, because I said, you know, art that is just your art, that doesn't communicate with somebody else, that doesn't help them understand their own humanity, is not doing the complete job that art is supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And so what we're looking for, James Baldwin in his first important essay talked about how it's important to write about the things that matter to you. This is an essay called Everybody's Protest Novel. And he said, it's great to protest and it's great to articulate the things that you care deeply about, but you've also got to make art that connects with other humans. And so one of the things that was most important to him, and he wrote about the things that mattered to him, but he also wanted to make that human connection, to talk about the things that were universal and not just the things that were particular. Mm-hmm. And so that's the thing that I always come back to as an artist and as a teacher is, this may not be my art, but I'm going to open myself up to it in every way that I can. And when I create something, I'm going to try and make sure that it's not just, you know, this sort of solipsistic thing that I care about that doesn't connect with anybody else. Because even if it enlarges me and enlarges my soul a little bit, I feel like the job of the artist is to help us understand our common humanity and to understand ourselves in relationship to each other.
I really love that. And I also, as we've been talking, I've been thinking this artwork has essentially been made famous by the fact that it was thrown in the bin. Yeah. Otherwise, would we have heard anything about it? I don't know. So they've maybe done them a favour, I think, by doing that. It's been so lovely to speak to you all. Thank you so much to author and anti-racism facilitator Brianna Bacado, writer and theologian Greg Garrett, and Islamic scholar Yahya Barry for being with me over the last hour. If you have missed any of the topics we discussed, including how voters of faith in the US might be influencing the elections and a reflection on Black History Month, then you can listen back on BBC Sounds by searching for Sunday Morning. Well, that's it for me this week. I'll be back for the afternoon show tomorrow from 1:30 when I'll be hearing from best-selling author Jodie Picoult and Queen of Scottish Comedy Susie McCabe. The Sunday show is next this morning, and taking us there, it's Madonna and Ray of Light.
Thank you.